It's probably not good to adjust the camera when you've gone live, but that's just the kind of show I am. Ooh, and the lighting's a little bit wonky and weird today. I decided to lean into the do-it-yourself, sort of low budget, no webcam, no money kind of operation. This is. Hello and welcome. I don't know, to A Cup of Tea, a Book, and Me. The Phantom Tollbooth Part 2. We're gonna hang around for a bit and chill and let everybody come in. And so I'll ask anybody who's watching and willing to chat, how are you? And if no one answers, that's cool. You don't have to feel obligated to talk to me. You came to watch, not to read. Citrus sunshine tea today. It's gray and rainy outside, so I decided I wanted something bright and happy and fun. And also I left the tea boiling for like way too long, so it was like super boiling. And I was like, well, I can't use jasmine tea because jasmine tea is light and delicate. So I have to use a tea that's a little bit more robust. And I didn't want to use a black tea because it's the afternoon and I want to get to sleep at night and I haven't been sleeping well lately. So I was like, you know what? I'll do citrus sunshine because it promises the 200% of my total vitamin C. So that's important. Super important. How's everyone doing? We doing good? I'm doing well. I have to text the group. Aw, my good friend Bill can't make it today. That's fine. Oh, I always want to say too much. No obligations. This is a chill. The Palace of Chillitude. That's this place. Oh, yes, I have to text my ladies.
Our chill is not glacial, it's palatial.
Our chill is not glacial, it's palatial. Indeed, my love, indeed. My girls, here we are. Live now. I'm making for incredibly interesting live TV right now. Woo! Boy, the era of live TV has really changed. It definitely has. It used to be something important, and now it's something that anybody can do. It used to be like the one person on the block had live TV, and you could see what was happening live. And now anybody and everybody are streaming from their apartments. It's quite incredible how things have changed. But the more things change, the more things stay the same. All right, one more text just to let people know. I'm tempted to take an Instagram photo, but I don't think I should do that. I think I should get into it. Social media is for other people who can actually, like, do it. I just read words. Words, words, words. So, we had just finished the first 4 chapters of The Phantom Tollbooth. In this book, we learned that Milo was a person who did not like anything very much at all. He never wanted to do anything, and he never wanted to go anywhere. But he wanted to do nothing very, very quickly, which sounds like a case of the Depression blues, if you ask me. Which this jacket is known for warding off, by the way. No depression blues while wearing this jacket. Anyway, so he gets a phantom toll booth. He gets a toll booth, and he has a little car, and he drives through. It's important to note that this toll booth is bright purple. But he gets this car, and he goes through this little toll booth, and all of a sudden he finds himself in a magical land. And he gets caught in a few places, and he meets some few characters, and then he comes to the main city, a place called Dictionopolis, where all the words are made. All the words in all the world are made in this spot. It's really quite incredible. So he meets 5 ministers of Dictionopolis who are literally walking. They're a walking thesaurus. And we learned a little bit about the history in the last one. I'm going to get better at these summaries, I swear. And then they had an upset with a humbug and a spelling bee at a market. And let's see, when we last left them, the humbug had tripped into one of the stalls and fallen over, and the bee had tangled himself in some bunting. And Milo was on top of him, and the bee was shouting, "Help, help, there's a little boy on me." And the bug sprawled untidily on a mound of squashed letters, and Talk, his alarm ringing persistently, was buried under a pile of words. Chapter 5. Short Shrift. "Done what you've looked," angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, "Look what you've done," but the words had gotten so hopelessly mixed up that no one could make any sense at all. I'm going to move the camera closer. Hey, look at that. I'm just suddenly closer. How's that zoom? My microphone is popping a little. Oh dear. Let me make sure it's properly plugged in because I had problems last time. Whoops. Hey, is that better? Is that microphone popping on now? I hope it fixed it. Let's take the whole chapter again, shall we? After another little sip of tea. All right. Take 2. Chapter 5. Short Shrift. "Done what you've looked," angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, "Look what you've done," but the words had gotten so hopelessly mixed up that no one could make any sense at all. "Do go into what we are," complained another, as everyone set about straightening things up as well they could. For several minutes, no one spoke an understandable sentence, which added greatly to the confusion. As soon as possible, however, the stalls were righted and the words swept into one large pile for sorting. The spelling bee, who was quite upset by the whole affair, had flown off in a huff, and just as Milo got onto his feet, the entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, loudly blowing his whistle. There's still some slight popping. Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure what to do about that. We'll move the microphone a little further away because I've got that theater pronunciation. I didn't go to Juilliard, but I can emote with the best of them. Oh, I'll have a little side table to put it on. That's even farther away. There we go. Maybe that'll be better. And I humbly request a cessation of typing for an hour to my darling husband. I love you very much. No typing, please. Anyway, continuing on. Yes, the entire police force of Dictionopolis has just appeared, and he was loudly blowing his whistle. "Now we'll get to the bottom of this," he heard someone say. "Here comes Officer Shrift." Striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. He was scarcely 2 feet tall, almost twice as wide, and he wore a blue uniform with white belt and gloves, a peaked cap, and a very fierce expression. He continued blowing on the whistle until his face was beet red, stopping only long enough to shout, "You're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty," at everyone he passed. I've never seen anyone so guilty, he shouted as he reached Milo. Then, turning towards Talk, who was still ringing loudly, he said, "Turn off that dog. It's disrespectful to sound your alarm in the presence of a policeman." He made a careful note of that in his black book and strode up and down, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the wreckage in the marketplace. Very pretty, he scowled. "Who's responsible for all this? Speak up or I'll arrest the lot of you." There was a long silence. Since hardly anybody had actually seen what had happened, nobody spoke. "You," said the policeman, pointing an accusing finger at the humbug, who was brushing himself off and straightening his hat. "You look suspicious to me." The startled humbug dropped his cane and nervously replied, "Let me assure you, sir, on my honor as a gentleman, that I was merely an innocent bystander, minding my own business, enjoying the stimulating sights and the sounds of the world of commerce, when this young lad—" "Aha!" interrupted Officer Shrift, making another note in his little book. "Just as I thought. Boys are the cause of everything." "Pardon me," insisted the humbug, "but I in no way meant to imply that—" "Silence!" thundered the policeman, pulling himself up to full height and glaring menacingly at the terrifying bug. "And now," he continued, speaking to Milo, "where were you on the night of July 27th? "What does that have to do with that?" answered Milo. "It's my birthday, that's what," said the policeman as he entered "Forgot my birthday" in the little book. "Boys are always forgetting other people's birthdays. You have committed the following crimes," he continued. "Having a dog with an unauthorized alarm, sowing confusion, upsetting the apple cart, wrecking havoc, and mincing words." "Now see here," Talk growled angrily. "And illegal barking," he added, frowning at the watchdog. "It's against the law to bark without using the barking meter. Are you ready to be sentenced?" "Only a judge can sentence you," said Milo, who remembered reading that in one of his school books. "Good point," replied the policeman, taking off his cap and putting on a long black robe. "I am also the judge. Now, would you like a long or short sentence?" "A short one, if you please," said Milo. "Good," said the judge, rapping his gavel 3 times. "I always have trouble remembering the long ones. How about I am? That's the shortest sentence I know." Everyone agreed that it was a very fair sentence, and the judge continued. "There will also be a small additional penalty of 6,000,000 years in prison. Case closed," he pronounced, rapping his gavel again. "Come with me. I'll take you to the dungeon." "Only a jailer can put you in prison?" offered Milo, quoting the same book. "Good point," said the judge, removing his robe and taking out a large bunch of keys. "I am also the jailer." And with that, he led them away. "Keep your chin up," shouted the humbug. "Maybe they'll take 1,000,000 years off for good behavior." The heavy prison door swung back slowly, and Milo and Talk followed Officer Shrift down a long, dark corridor lit only by an occasional flickering of candle. "Watch the steps," advised the policeman as they started down a steep, circular staircase. The air was dank and musty, and smelled like the smell of wet blankets, and the massive stone walls were slimy to the touch. Down and down they went, until they arrived at another door, even heavier and stronger looking than the first. A cobweb brushed across Milo's face, and he shuddered. "You'll find it quite pleasant here," chuckled the policeman, as he slid the bolt back and pushed the door open with a screech and a squeak. "Not much company, but you can always chat with the witch." "The witch?" trembled Milo. "Yes, she's been here a long time," he said, starting along another corridor. In a few more minutes, they had gone through 3 other doors, across a narrow footbridge, down 2 more corridors and another stairway, and stood finally in front of a small cell door. "This is it," said the policeman. "All the comforts of home." The door opened and then shut, and Milo and Talk found themselves in a high vaulted ceiling with 2 tiny windows halfway up on the wall. See you in 6 million years, said Officer Shrift, and the sound of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it wasn't heard at all. It looks serious, doesn't it, Talk? Said Milo sadly. It certainly does, the dog replied, sniffing around to see what their new quarters were like. I don't know what we're going to do for all that time. We don't even have a checker set or a box of crayons. Don't worry, growled Talk, raising one paw assuringly. Something will turn up. Here, wind me, will you please? I'm beginning to run down. You know something, Talk, he said as he wound up the dog. You can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words, or just not knowing how to spell them. If we ever get out of here, I'm going to make sure to learn all about them. A very commendable ambition, young man, said a small voice from across the cell. Milo looked up, very surprised, and noticed for the first time in the half-light of the room a pleasant-looking old lady, quietly knitting and rocking. Hello, he said. How do you do? She replied. You'd better be careful, Milo advised. I understand there's a witch somewhere around here. I am she, the old lady answered casually, and pulled her shawl a little closer round her shoulders. Milo jumped back in fright and quickly grabbed Talk to make sure his alarm didn't go off, for he knew how much witches hated loud noises. Don't be frightened, she laughed. I'm not a witch. I'm a witch. Oh, said Milo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. I am faintly macabre, the not-so-wicked witch. I forgot about her. Oh, she's my favorite. I am certainly not going to harm you. What's a witch? Asked Milo, releasing Talk and stepping a little closer. Well, said the old lady, just as a rat scurried across her foot, I am the king's great-aunt. For years and years I was in charge of choosing which words were to be used for all occasions, which ones to say and which ones not to say, which ones to write and which ones not to write. As you can well imagine, with all the thousands to choose from, it was a most important and responsible job. I was given the title of official witch, which made me very proud and happy. At first, I did my best to make sure that only the most proper and fitting words were used. Everything was said clearly and simply, and no words were ever wasted. I had signs posted all over the palace and marketplace which said, "Brevity is the soul of wit." But power corrupts, and I soon grew miserly and chose fewer and fewer words, trying to keep as many as possible for myself. I had new signs posted which said, "An ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger." Soon, sales began to fall off in the market. The people were afraid to buy as many words as before, and hard times came to the kingdom. But I still grew more miserly. Soon there were so few words chosen that hardly anything could be said, and even casual conversation became difficult. Again, I had new signs posted, which said, "Speak fitly," or "Be silent wisely." And finally, I had even those replaced by ones which read simply, "Silence is golden." All talk stopped. No words were sold, the marketplace closed down, and the people grew poor and disconsolate. When the king saw what had happened, he became furious and had me cast into this dungeon, where you see me now, an older and wiser woman. That was all many years ago, she continued, but they never appointed a new witch, and that explains why today so many people use up as many words as they can and think themselves very wise for doing so. For always remember that while it is wrong to use too few, it is often far worse to use too many. When she had finished, she sighed deeply, patted Milo gently on the shoulder, and began knitting once again. "And you have been down here ever since then?" asked Milo sympathetically. "Yes," she said sadly. "Most people have forgotten me entirely, or remember me wrongly as a witch, and not a witch. But it matters not, she went on unhappily, for they are equally frightened of both." "I don't think you are frightening," said Milo, and Talk wagged his tail in agreement. I thank you very much, said Faintly Macabre. You may call me Aunt Faintly. Here, have a punctuation mark. And she held out a box of sugar-coated question marks, periods, commas, and exclamation points. That's all I get to eat now. Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to help you, Milo declared forcefully. That's very nice of you, she replied, but the only thing that can help me is the return of rhyme and reason. The return of what? Asked Milo. Rhyme and reason, she repeated. But that's another long story, and you may not want to hear it. We would like to very much, barked Talk. We really would, agreed Milo. And as the witch rocked slowly back and forth, she told them the story. Chapter 6. Faintly Macabre's Story. Sometimes I can get a little bit pretentious with the R on macabre. So once upon a time, this land was a barren and frightening wilderness, whose high, rocky mountains sheltered the evil winds, and whose barren valleys offered hospitality to no man. Few things grew, and those that did were bent and twisted, and their fruit was as bitter as wormwood. What wasn't waste is desert, and what wasn't desert was rock, and the demons of darkness made their home in the hills. Evil creatures roamed at will through the countryside and down the sea. It was known as the Land of Null. Then, one day, a small ship appeared on the Sea of Knowledge. It carried a young prince seeking the future. In the name of goodness and truth, he laid claim to all the country and set out to explore his new domain. The demons, monsters, and giants were furious at his presumption and banded together to drive him out. The earth shook with their battle, and when they had finished, all that remained to the prince was a small piece of land at the edge of the sea. I'll build my city here, he declared, and that is what he did. Before long, more ships came bearing settlers for the new land, and the city grew and pushed its boundaries farther and farther out. Each day it was attacked anew, but nothing could destroy the prince's new city. And grow it did. Soon it was no longer just a city, it was a kingdom, and it was called the Kingdom of Wisdom. But outside the walls, all was not safe, and the new king vowed to conquer the land that was rightfully his. So each spring he set forth with his army, and each autumn he returned, and year by year the kingdom grew larger and more prosperous. He took to himself a wife, and before long he had 2 fine sons, to whom he taught everything he knew, so that one day they might rule wisely. When the boys grew to manhood, the king called them to him and said, I am becoming an old man and can no longer go forth to battle. You must take my place and found new cities in the wilderness, for the kingdom of wisdom must grow. And so they did. One went south to the foothills of confusion and built Dictionopolis, a city of words. And one went to the mountains of ignorance and built Digitopolis, the city of numbers. Both cities flourished mightily, and the demons were driven back still further. Soon other cities and towns were founded in the new lands, and at last only the farthest reaches of the wilderness remained to these terrible creatures. And there they waited, ready to strike down all who ventured near or relaxed their guard. The 2 brothers were glad, however, to go their separate ways, for they were by nature very suspicious and jealous. Each one tried to outdo the other, and they worked so hard and diligently at it that before long their cities rivaled even wisdom in size and grandeur. Words are more important than wisdom, said one privately. Numbers are more important than wisdom, thought the other to himself, and they grew to dislike each other more and more. The old king, however, who knew nothing of his son's animosity, was very happy in the twilight of his reign, and spent his days quietly walking and contemplating in the royal gardens. His only regret was that he'd never had a daughter, for he loved little girls as much as he loved little boys, and one day, as he was strolling peacefully about the grounds, he discovered 2 tiny babies that had been abandoned in a basket under the grape arbor. They were beautiful golden-haired girls. The king was overjoyed. "They have been sent to crown my old age," he cried, and called the queen, his ministers, the palace staff, and indeed the entire population to see them. "We'll call this one Rhyme and this one Reason," he said. And so they became the Princess of Sweet Rhyme and the Princess of Pure Reason, and were brought up in the palace. When the old king finally died, the kingdom was divided between his 2 sons, with the provision that they would be equally responsible for the welfare of the young princesses. One son went south and became Azaz the Unabridged, king of Dictionopolis, and the other went north and became the Mathemagician, ruler of Digitopolis. And, true to their words, they provided well for the little girls, who continued to live in wisdom. Everyone loved the princesses because of their great beauty, their gentle ways, and their ability to settle all controversies fairly and reasonably. People with problems or grievances or arguments came from all over the land to seek advice, and even the 2 brothers, who by this time were fighting continuously, often called upon them to help them decide matters of state. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answer all problems. As the years passed, the 2 brothers grew farther and farther apart, and their separate kingdoms became richer and grander. Their disputes, however, became more and more difficult to reconcile, but always, with patience and love, the princesses set things right. Then one day they had the most terrible quarrel of all. King Azaz insisted that words were far more significant than numbers, and hence his kingdom was truly greater. And the math magician claimed that numbers were much more important than words, and hence his kingdom was supreme. They discussed and debated and raved and ranted until they were on the verge of blows, when it was decided to submit the question to arbitration by the princesses. After days of careful consideration, in which all the evidence was weighed and all the witnesses heard, they made their decision. Words and numbers are of equal value, for in the cloak of knowledge one is warp and the other is woof. It is no more important to count the sands than it is to name the stars. Therefore, let both kingdoms live in peace. Everyone was pleased with the verdict. Everyone, that is, but the 2 brothers, who were beside themselves with anger. "What good are these girls if they cannot settle an argument in someone's favor?" they growled, since both of them were more interested in their own advantage than in the truth. "We'll banish them from the kingdom forever." And so they were taken from the palace and sent far away to the castle in the air, and they have not been seen since. And that is why, today, in all this land, there is neither rhyme nor reason. "And what happened to the 2 rulers?" asked Milo. "Banishing the 2 princesses was the last thing they ever agreed upon, and they soon fell to warring with each other. Despite this, their own kingdoms have continued to prosper, but the old city of wisdom has fallen into great disrepair, and there is no one to set things right. So you see, until the princesses return, I shall have to stay here." "Maybe we can rescue them," said Milo, as he saw how sad the witch looked. "Ah, that would be difficult," she replied. "The castle in the air is far from here, and the one stairway which leads to it is guarded by fierce and black-hearted demons." Talk growled ominously, for he hated even the thought of demons. "I'm afraid there's not much a little boy and a dog can do," she said, "but never you mind, for it's not so bad. I've grown quite used to it here. But you must be going, or else you'll waste the whole day." "Oh, we're here for 6 million years," sighed Milo, "and I don't see any way to escape." "Nonsense," scolded the witch. "You mustn't take Officer Shrift so seriously. He loves to put people in prison, but he doesn't care about keeping them there. Now just press that button on the wall and be on your way." Milo pressed the button and the door swung open, letting in a shaft of brilliant sunshine. "Goodbye! Come again!" shouted the witch, as they stepped outside and the door slammed shut. Milo and Talk stood blinking in the bright light, and as their eyes became accustomed to it, the first things they saw were the king's advisors again rushing toward them. "Ah, there you are! Where have you been? We've been looking all over for you. The royal banquet is about to begin. Come with us." They seemed very agitated and out of breath as Milo walked along with them. "But what about my car?" he replied. "Don't need it," replied the Duke. "No use for it," said the minister. "Superfluous," advised the Count. "Unnecessary," stated the Earl. "Uncalled for," cried the Under-Secretary. "We'll take our vehicle. Conveyance, rig, charbonk, chariot, buggy, coach, bowman, Chandridam," they repeated quickly in order, and pointed to a small wooden wagon. "Oh dear, all those words again," thought Milo as he climbed into the wagon with Talk and the cabinet members. "How are you going to make it move? It doesn't have a—" "Be very quiet," advised the Duke, "for it goes without saying." And sure enough, as soon as they were all quite still, it began to move quickly through the streets. In a very short time, they arrived at the royal palace. That's a lovely little pun. Chapter 7. The Royal Banquet. Oh, I love this chapter. "Right this way! Follow along! Come along! Step lively! Here we go!" they shouted, hopping from the wagon and bounding up the broad marble stairway. Milo and Talk followed close behind. It was a strange-looking palace, and if he didn't know any better, Milo would have said that it looked exactly like an enormous book, standing on an end with its front door in the lower part of the binding, just where they usually place the publisher's name. Once inside, they hurried down a long hallway, which glittered with crystal chandeliers and echoed with their footsteps. The walls and— Apollo? He's giving love to my chalkboard and made it move. That's my little cat. You can see his little tail there. Oh, the little tail of Apollo. Shh, we're in the halls of Dictionopolis now. Be respectful. The walls and ceilings were covered with mirrors, whose reflections danced dizzily along with them, and the footman bowed oddly. "We must be terribly late," gasped the Earl nervously as they reached the tall doors of the banquet hall. It was a vast room, full of people loudly talking and arguing. The long table was carefully set with gold plates and linen napkins. An attendant stood behind each chair, and at the center, raised slightly above the others, was a throne covered in crimson cloth. Directly behind, on the wall, was the royal coat of arms, flanked by the flags of Dictionopolis. And it has been remiss in me that I have not been showing you all these lovely illustrations. But there, my lovelies, is the royal coat of arms of Dictionopolis. These illustrations are by Jules Pfeiffer, and they are quite lovely. There, for instance, is Officer Short Shrift, who I think is quite fun. I'll show more of these. I apologize for not showing them sooner. Milo noticed many of the people he had seen in the marketplace. The letterman was busy explaining to an interested group the history of the W, and off in a corner the humbug and spelling bee were arguing fiercely about nothing at all. Officer Shrift wandered through the crowd, suspiciously muttering, "Guilty, guilty, they're all guilty," and on noticing Milo, brightened visibly, and commented in passing, "Is it 6 million years already? My, how time flies." Everyone seemed quite grumpy about having to wait for lunch, and they were all relieved to see the tardy guests arrive. "Certainly glad you finally made it," said the humbug, cordially pumping Milo's hand. "As guest of honor, you must choose the menu, of course." "Oh my," he thought, not knowing what to say. "Be quick about it," suggested the spelling bee. "I am famished. Famished." As Milo tried to think, there was an ear-shattering blast of trumpets, entirely off-key, and a page announced to the startled guests, "King Azaz the Unabridged." The king strode through the door and over to the table, and settled his great bulk onto the throne, calling irritably, "Places, everyone, take your places." He was the largest man Milo had ever seen, with a great stomach, large piercing eyes, a gray beard that reached to his waist, and a silver signet ring on the little finger of his left hand. He also wore a small crown and a robe with the letters of the alphabet beautifully embroidered all over it. "What have we here?" he said, staring down at Tock and Milo as everyone else took their place. "If you please," said Milo, "my name is Milo, and this is Tock. Thank you very much for inviting us to your banquet. I think your palace is beautiful." "Exquisite," corrected the Duke. "Lovely," counseled the minister. "Handsome," recommended the Count. "Pretty," hinted the Earl. "Charming," submitted the Under-Secretary. "Silence," suggested the King. "Now, young man, what can you do to entertain us? Sing songs, tell stories, compose sonnets, juggle plates, do tumbling tricks? What is it?" "I can't do any of those things," admitted Milo. "What an ordinary little boy," commented the King. "Why, my cabinet members can do all sorts of things. The Duke here can make mountains out of molehills. The minister splits hairs. The Count makes hay while the sun shines. The Earl leaves no stone unturned. And the Under-Secretary," he finished ominously, "hangs by a thread. Can't you do anything at all?" "I can count to 1,000, offered Milo. "Ah, numbers! Never mention numbers here. Only use them when we absolutely have to," growled Azaz disgustedly. "Now, why don't you and Talk come up here and sit next to me, and we'll have some dinner. Are you ready with the menu?" reminded the humbug. "Oh, well," said Milo, remembering that his mother had always told him to eat lightly when he was a guest. "Why don't we have a light meal?" "A light meal it shall be," roared the bug, waving his arms. The waiters rushed in, carrying serving platters, and set them on the table in front of the King. When he lifted the covers, shafts of brilliant colored light leapt from the plates and bounced around the ceiling and walls, across the floor and out the windows. "Not a very substantial meal," said the humbug, rubbing his eyes, "but quite an attractive one. Perhaps you can suggest something a little more filling." The King clapped his hands. The platters were removed, and without thinking, Milo quickly suggested, "Well, in that case, I think we ought to have a square meal of—" "A square meal it is!" shouted the humbug again. The King clapped his hands once more, and the waiters reappeared, carrying plates heaped high with steaming squares of all sizes and colors. "Ugh," said the spelling bee, tasting one. "These are awful." No one else seemed to like them very much either, and the humbug got one caught in his throat and almost choked. "Time for the speeches," announced the King, as the plates were again removed and everyone looked glum. "You first," he commanded, pointing to Milo. "Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen," started Milo timidly, "I would like to take this opportunity to say in all the—" "That's quite enough," snapped the King. "Mustn't take all day." "But I've just begun," objected Milo. "Next," bellowed the King. "Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, vanilla ice cream," recited the humbug, bouncing up and down quickly. What a strange speech, thought Milo, for he'd heard many in the past and knew they were supposed to be long and dull. Spelling bee in his turn. "Frankfurters, sour pickles, strawberry jam," shouted Officer Shrift from his chair. "Whoops! Ah, sorry, something happened." My voice assist suddenly came on after weeks of never being able to use it. What do you know? And so it went, and so down the line it went, with each guest rising, making a short speech, and then resuming his place. When everyone had finished, the King rose. "Pâté de foie gras, soupe à l'oignon, faisin chou cloche, salade endive, fromage et fruits au demi-tard," he said carefully, and clapped his hands again. The waiters reappeared immediately, carrying heavy hot trays, which they set on the table. Each one contained the exact words spoken by the various guests, and they all began eating immediately with great gusto. "Dig in," said the King, poking Milo with his elbow and looking disapprovingly at his plate. "I can't say that I think much of your choice." "I didn't know that I was going to have to eat my words," objected Milo. Of course, everyone here does," said the King. "You should have made a tastier speech." Milo looked around at everyone busily stuffing himself, and then back at his own unappetizing plate. It certainly didn't look worth eating, and he was so very hungry. Here, try some somersault, suggested the Duke. It improves the flavor. Have a rigmarole, offered the Count, passing the bread basket. Or a ragamuffin, seconded the minister. Perhaps you care for a synonym bun, suggested the Duke. Why not just wait for your just desserts, mumbled the Earl indistinctly, his mouth full of food. How many times must I tell you not to bite off more than you could chew, snapped the under-secretary, patting the distressed Earl on the back. In one ear and out the other, scolded the Duke, attempting to stuff one of his words through the Earl's head. If it isn't one thing, it's another, chided the minister. Out the frying pan into the fryer, shouted the Count, burning himself badly. Well, you don't have to bite my head off, screamed the terrified Earl, and flew at the others in a rage. The five of them scuffled wildly under the table. Stop that at once, thundered Azaz, or I'll banish the lot of you. Sorry. Excuse me. Forgive us. Pardon. Regrets. They apologized in turn and sat down glaring at each other. The rest of the meal was finished in silence until the king, wiping up the gravy stains from his vest, called for dessert. Milo, who had not eaten anything, looked up eagerly. We're having a special treat today, said the king, as the delicious smells of homemade pastry filled the banquet hall. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night in the half-bakery to make sure that... The half-bakery? Questioned Milo. Of course the half-bakery, snapped the king. Where do you think half-baked ideas come from? Now please don't interrupt. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night to... What's a half-baked idea? Asked Milo again. Will you be quiet? Growled Azaz angrily, but before he could begin again, 3 large serving carts were wheeled into the hall, and everyone jumped up to help themselves. They're very tasty, explained the humbug, but they don't always agree with you. Here's one that's very good. He handed it to Milo, and through the icing and nuts, Milo saw that it said, The earth is flat. People swallow that one for years, commented the spelling bee, but it's not very popular these days. D-A-Y-S. He picked up a long one that stated, The moon is made of green cheese, and hungrily bit off the part that said cheese. Now there's a half-baked idea, he said, smiling. Milo looked at the great assortment of cakes, which were being eaten almost as quickly as anyone could read them. The Count was munching contentedly on, It never rains, but it pours, and the king was busy slicing one that stated, Night air is bad air. I wouldn't eat too many of those if I were you, advised Talk. They may look good, but you can get terribly sick of them. Don't worry, replied Milo. I'll just wrap one up for later. And he folded his napkin around. Everything happens for the best. Chapter 8. The last chapter we'll read tonight. The humbug volunteers. Couldn't eat another thing, puffed the Duke, clutching his stomach. Oh my, oh dear, agreed the minister, breathing with great difficulty. The Earl just mumbled, desperately trying to swallow another mouthful. Thoroughly stuffed, sighed the Count, loosening his belt. Full up, grunted the under-secretary, reaching for the last keg. As everyone finished, the only sounds to be heard were the creaking of chairs, the pushing of plates, the licking of spoons, and of course, a few words from the humbug. A delightful repast, delicately prepared and elegantly served, he announced to no one in particular. A feast of rare bouquet. My compliments to the chef by all means. My compliments to the chef. Then, with a most distressed look on his face, he turned to Milo and gasped, Would you kindly fetch me a glass of water? I seem to have a touch of indigestion. Perhaps you've eaten too much too quickly, Milo remarked sympathetically. Too much too quickly, too much too quickly, wheezed the uncomfortable bug between gulps. To be sure, too much too quickly. I most certainly should have eaten too little too slowly, or too much too slowly, or too little too quickly, or taken all day to eat nothing, or eaten everything in no time at all, or occasionally eaten something any time, or perhaps I should have... and he toppled back, exhausted, into his chair, continuing to mumble indistinctly. "Attention! Let me have your attention!" insisted the king, leaping to his feet and pounding the table. The command was entirely unnecessary, for the moment he began to speak, everyone but Milo, Talk, and the distraught Bug rushed from the hall, down the stairs, and out of the palace. "Loyal subjects and friends," continued Azaz, his voice echoing in the almost empty room, "once again on this gala occasion we have—" "Pardon me," coughed Milo as politely as possible, "but everyone has gone." "I was hoping no one would notice," said the king sadly. "It happens every time." "They've all gone to dinner," announced the humbug. "Just as soon as I catch my breath, I shall join them." "That's ridiculous. How can they eat dinner right after a banquet?" asked Milo. "Scandalous!" shouted the king. "We'll put a stop to it at once. From now on, by royal command, everyone must eat dinner before the banquet." "But that's just as bad," protested Milo. "You mean just as good," corrected the humbug. "Things which are equally bad are also equally good. Try to look on the bright side of things." "I don't know which side of anything to look at," protested Milo. "Everything is so confusing, and all your words only make it worse." "How true," said the unhappy king, resting his regal chin on his royal fist as he thought fondly of the old days. "There must be something we can do about it." "Pass a law," said the humbug brightly. "We have almost as many laws as words," grumbled the king. "Offer a reward," offered the bug again. The king shook his head and looked sadder and sadder. "Send for help, drive a bargain, pull the switch, file a brief, lower the boom, tow the line, raise the bridge, bar the door," shouted the bug, jumping up and down and waving his arms. Then he promptly sat down as the king glanced furiously in his direction. "Perhaps you might allow Rhyme and Reason to return," said Milo softly, for he had been waiting for just such an opportunity to suggest it. "How nice that would be," said Azaz, straightening up and adjusting his crown. "Even if it were a bother at times, things always went so well when they were here." As he spoke, he leaned back on the throne, clasped his hands behind his head, and stared thoughtfully at the ceiling. "But I'm afraid it can't be done." "Certainly not. It can't be done," repeated the humbug. "Why not?" asked Milo. "Why not indeed?" exclaimed the bug, who seemed to be equally at home on either side of the argument. "Much too difficult," replied the king. "Of course," emphasized the bug, "much too difficult." "You could if you really wanted to," insisted Milo. "By all means, if you really wanted to, you could," the humbug agreed. "How?" said Azaz, glaring at the bug. "How?" inquired Milo, looking the same way. "A simple task," began the humbug, suddenly wishing he were somewhere else. "For a brave lad with a stout heart, a steadfast dog, and a serviceable small automobile." "Go on," commanded the king. "Yes, please," seconded Milo. "All he would have to do," continued the worried bug, "is travel through miles of harrowing and hazardous countryside, into unknown valleys and uncharted forests, past yawning chasms and trackless wastes, until he reached Digitopolis. If, of course, he ever reached there. Then he would have to persuade the math magician to agree to release the little princesses. And, of course, he'd never agree to anything that you agreed with. And anyway, if he did, you certainly wouldn't agree to it. For from there, it's a simple matter of entering the mountains of ignorance, full of perilous pitfalls and ominous overtones, a land to which many venture but few return, and whose evil demons slither slowly from peak to peak in search of prey. Then an effortless climb up a 2,000-step circular stairway without railings in a high wind at night, for in those mountains it is always night, to the castle in the air." He paused momentarily for breath, then began again. "After a pleasant chat with the princesses, all that remains is a leisurely ride back through those chaotic crags whose frightening fiends have sworn to tear any intruder limb from limb and devour him down to his belt buckle. And finally, after the long ride back, a triumphal parade, if of course there is anything left to parade, followed by hot chocolate and cookies for everyone." The humbug bowed low and sat down once again, very pleased with himself. I never realized it would be so simple, said the king, stroking his beard and smiling broadly. Quite simple indeed, concurred the bug. Sounds dangerous to me, said Milo. Most dangerous, mumbled the humbug, still trying to be in agreement with everybody. Who will make the journey? Asked Talk, who had been listening very carefully to the humbug's description. A very good question, replied the king, but there is one far more serious problem. What is it? Asked Milo, who was rather unhappy at the turn the conversation had taken. I'm afraid I can't tell you that, only when you return. I'm so sorry, I said that sentence completely wrong. I'm afraid I can tell you that only when you return, cried the king, clapping his hands 3 times. As he did so, the waiters rushed back into the room and quickly cleared away the dishes, the silver, the tablecloth, the table, the chairs, the banquet hall, and the palace, leaving them all suddenly standing in the marketplace. Of course you realize that I would like to make the trip myself, continued Azaz, striding across the square as if nothing had happened. But since it was your idea, you shall have all the honor and fame. But you see, began Milo. Dictionopolis will always be grateful, my boy, interrupted the king, throwing one arm around Milo and patting Talk with the other. You will face many dangers on your journey, but fear not, for I have brought you this for your protection. He drew from inside his cape a small, heavy box about the size of a school book and handed it ceremoniously to Milo. In this box are all the words I know, he said. Most of them you will never need, some you will use constantly, but with them you may ask all the questions which have never been answered, and answer all the questions which have never been asked. All the great books of the past, and all the ones yet to come are made with these words. With them there is no obstacle you cannot overcome. All you must learn to do is use them well and in the right places. Milo accepted the gift with thanks, and the little group walked to the car, still parked at the edge of the square. You will, of course, need a guide, said the king, and since he knows obstacles so well, the humbug has cheerfully volunteered to accompany you. Now see here, cried the startled bug, for that was the last thing in the world he wanted to do. You will find him dependable, brave, resourceful, and loyal, continued Azaz, and the humbug was so overcome by the flattery that he quite forgot to object again. I'm sure he'll be a great help, cried Milo as they drove across the square. I hope so, thought Talk to himself, for he was far less sure. Good luck, do be careful, shouted the king, and down the road they went. Milo and Talk wondered what strange adventures lay ahead. The humbug speculated on how he'd ever become involved in such a hazardous undertaking, and the crowd waved and cheered wildly, for while they didn't care about anyone arriving, they were always very pleased to see someone go. And there you have it, the next 4 chapters of The Phantom Tollbooth. Tune in on Sunday, and we will hear the next 4 chapters. We will get some stunning things like, it's all in how you look at things, a colorful symphony, and discord and din. Very, very fun stuff. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you check out some other videos on my YouTube channel, I'm going to be uploading random videos. There's really only one other video out there that's not narration. It's a ukulele cover. So that's fun. And there are more projects coming in the future. I just have to get through technical difficulties, and I'm doing it. So stay tuned. I love you all. Bye. End stream. End.